Hey y'all, welcome back to Resilient and Rowdy. This is your host, Jess, and today's special guest is Michael.
Hello. How
How
are
you
you?
doing?
Good. I'm trying to stay dry in the Carolina humidity. I'm glad I have air conditioning.
Bless. Yes, thank goodness for AC. Oh my gosh, it's been a hot summer. Yeah, keeping it cool, collected as much as you can. And then you like step out the door and you just get slapped in the face with you. So, Michael, we've known each other for a couple of years now. It's been really cool to just see what you've been up to and thriving post military. You recently shared with me that you also wrote a book. Yeah. So I love this. I love seeing veterans get into the creative process and express themselves that way. But first and foremost, Michael, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Michael. I currently am a creative writing professor at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. I got out and I'm from Southern California. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton. I was Greenside Navy, assigned to the Marines. I was an RP. I loved my job, loved being with my Marines. I was stationed at the Naval Academy, and I just got tired of being enlisted. I got tired. We all know how it is, right? Everybody always hits that bullshit meter one moment, and you're like, fuck it. I'm dropping papers. I'm out. Some people retire. Some people do 4. I did almost like just shy of 10. And so all my friends that we'd come up together in the ranks, they were now staff sergeants and gunnies and whatever, and some chiefs and other Navy first classes. And they had all gone from Pendleton to Lejeune or Cherry Point or whatever up here. I was like, oh, let me go to a school that's got my friends there. My wife, she was my girlfriend at the time. She was stationed at the Naval Hospital. And so I just figured I would just go to school, get a degree, and just hop back into the military because that's what I thought. And I ended up having a hole in my schedule because, you had to, when you're on the GI Bill, you had to fill your schedule with classes, and all the classes I was interested in taking I'd already had, but I was one class short. I used to like to read as a kid, and I used to like to write as a kid. And truth be told, like that was my little fantasy growing up, working class Hispanic kid, that I wanted to be a college professor and a writer. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's never going to happen for me. So I took a creative writing class. It was the first class I ever took in actual college. Like I took classes when I was on active duty at the Base Education Center when I was on Camp Hansen in Okinawa. But this was my first college experience. My TA was there, and she was like, I wrote some stuff, and she's like, hey, you're pretty talented. Like, you should do this. I was like, yeah, no, okay. I've got plans. I'm going to go back in the military. I want to go do this. And she's like, just think about it. And maybe if you have some time and in your schedule, maybe take another creative writing class and just see how that goes. I was like, yeah, sure, fine. I did. I also tried to do 2 things. One, I tried to go back home because I was just tired of being out. So I just tried to go back and enlisted, and they're like, yeah, we don't need you. And then the Marine Corps also was like, yeah, we're not going to need prior service officers anymore. So have a good life. And at the same time, the Marine recruiter was like, yeah, we're not taking any prior enlisted. This was in 2011. So they thought that the war was just going to complete stop, and they didn't want us. They didn't need us. The end of it. And I was like, all right, cool. At the same time, I had gotten published with an essay that I had written for one of my other creative writing TAs. And I just never looked back after that. I graduated with my undergraduate degree, went to graduate school at UNC Wilmington, was a TA. So I taught creative writing as a graduate teaching assistant, went to work at UNCW after I graduated in the pub lab. I was the assistant director for almost 6 years at this point, I think, right around there. And then as of Monday, the 1st of July, I moved and became a creative writing professor. So I moved. And so that's how I got into it. Once I started taking those creative writing classes, I really thought a lot about creativity and the importance of creativity in the military life. And one of the things like me and my friends would talk a lot about is that the United States half-asses everything. They want us to be killers, especially when you're with the Marines, right? That's all you hear is kill, kill. What makes the grass grow, blood, like all of it. And you being in the Army, like same thing, right? Combat arms, like that's your whole job. And they want the killing part, but they tend to neglect the rest of the body and the rest of the soul and the spirit, right? They only want the business end. Go to your platoon sergeant and be like, I would like to compose a song. And they'd be like, get the fuck out of here. Like, I remember I was doing a podcast one time and somebody's like, what was mental health like when you were on active duty? And I just laughed like a good 30 seconds straight. That's like mental health was, here's your fucking straw, go to BAS maybe, the end. That's it. And my wife's a VSO. And so she's seen it over and over again where men and women say this is what's bothering me, but there's nothing in the record. And then the VA's like, fuck you, there's nothing in your record. Of course there's nothing in our record.
Yeah.
We had to rock that shit on our own. That's right. But thinking a lot about it, I'm a nerd. I think a lot. I wrote an article back when I worked with OAF way back in the day about the case for arts in the veteran community. I'm glad there's so many organizations now like PB Abate, their book club, and there's just so many resources now for veterans and military folks to get involved in reading, getting involved, like
Absolutely.
creative vets,
And I
Zach.
love
There's so
amazing.
much out there now that when I got out in 2010, like I was like a pathfinder, like there was nothing out here, right? Like you could
Yeah.
go to like the DAV or the VFW or the American Legion. That was it. And there was like the Wounded Warrior folks, but I wasn't a Wounded Warrior. So I couldn't go do any of that stuff. And so now it is really such a refreshing thing. Like I can talk to people and I'm not like a weirdo. Yeah, we should get involved in the arts. So like, dude, we totally should. So I think it's a really great moment in our military and post-military cultures that we can have a frank conversation about the arts and the ability of the arts to heal. But for me, it wasn't about healing necessarily. It was about making actual art of the stuff that I had been through, right? I think that there's a difference between making art and healing. I think making art can be healing. I didn't write this to resolve my issues. I wrote my book because I wanted to make art out of these things. You think being a creative writing professor, I'd be a little bit more articulate. Words, I'm math terrible. You'd think I do words good.
Now we've come a long way and we're able to have these discussions. We're able to build communities and groups, and people don't just write you off or just make fun of you for it. It's more of, if that's what works for you, if that's what you're passionate about, I'm going to support you. You do you. And I'm glad that you also mentioned how you were wanting to, it almost sounds like you wanted to mute your experience into something. It's like molding clay, like making
Yeah.
pottery. You're moving, you're seeing what works, what doesn't, what feels good. And it's not always necessarily profit for attention. It's more of just getting these thoughts out of your heart and your mind and making something beautiful and almost like something like concrete, something that you can physically see and touch. And there is something very beautiful about that process of putting pen to paper. If you watch like a pianist just move their fingers very intricately on a piano, it's almost the same way when you're writing on a keyboard. So I'm really glad that you found that outlet, as well as listening to your counselor when they suggested another creative writing class. Because most people naturally, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to do my prerequisites and I'm going to keep moving forward. But they saw something in you. And that's what I feel like a real leader and a real, counselor should be doing, is they see something and something might come of it in endless ways. I'm glad that you took that suggestion, because most people would just be like, yeah, whatever. And sometimes I feel like that's how I'm seeing some trends lately, like me turning 30 and listening to my peers that are a little older or the same age. It's okay. Sometimes advice is a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of, you see some potential in front of you and you're like, how can I best serve this person? They didn't see you as just a number or a student or what have you. They saw you as just a creative before you even did yourself. You took that journey and made something really cool out of it. And it sounds really fulfilling too.
Yeah, it is. And her name was Allison Revis, by the way, and she's actually in the book. And then the other TA was Josh Anderson, that I wrote an essay in his class and it got published. First time I'd ever written anything serious got published
Mhm.
by the Sun magazine years ago.
Mhm.
I didn't realize it at the time. And now that I'm thinking about it now, just you and I talking about it, and I talk a lot about this in the book too. Like when we get out, not everybody, but I certainly did. I was that ass hat bro vet when I first got out. Like everything, I was mad at everything. I was mad at and I think it's okay to be that person as long as you don't remain that person, because it's like a breaking out period. You're saying goodbye to one thing. It's just a form of I hate the word transition for a lot of reasons, which maybe we'll get to. But like you're taking off the uniform. I think they do a shitty job of preparing us to come home. And one of the questions I say in an essay is, why would they prepare you to come home? You fucking live here. You are an American. What is there to tell? And they don't realize that time stops for us, even if you're just on active duty and then you go back home to wherever home when you enlisted. Like your people grew this way back home, you grew this way, neither of you realized that you grew. It's like somebody hit a stopwatch on that part of your life. And so trying to figure all that out. And again, like it's not the place where you want to leave, right? Like I see those dudes that like they've been out for 15 years and they're still angry at everything. They're still always,
Jaded.
I get it. Like it's the one thing you have left is your anger. And so I've always felt like men and women that do that, like they're afraid to let go. They'd rather hold on to this toxic language and this toxic behavior and this toxic attitude
Yeah.
because that's familiar.
I
They
can see
know
that.
that.
I
And if
think it's
you're like,
also easier to be angry than to let yourself feel everything else because there's like a layer to that anger. There's sadness, there's remorse, there's regret, survivor's guilt. You didn't do enough, or you're alive and you didn't want to be,
yeah,
etc. So, yeah, and you have to make it a deliberate effort to get unstuck and surround yourself with people who will elevate you out of that, you
yeah,
know?
you're right. And I've been really fortunate where those, and when we get out, we're like, we tend to look down on civilians for a lot of reasons that those of us in the military community, you could have a whole 9-hour podcast just on that.
Or there's just like a bit of a disconnect. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't, yeah, some people absolutely look down on people. I can't relate, but I can definitely feel and I sensed that disconnect. Like my peers that went to college and I went to the army, there was just this very black and white difference. And it's up to you to work on that because we can both learn from each other. You know what I
exactly.
mean?
I remember I had a doc, his name was Jason Malig, and this was years ago, and he unfriended me on Facebook, rightfully, because I was just complaining about everything. He was
Mhm.
like, don't discount these people. Yeah, they didn't go to Iraq like we did, and yeah, they didn't do this, but they're smart, they're generous, they're
Yeah.
funny. See, and I was like, yeah, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But then I had these two TAs who saw me as somebody with potential, saw me as a peer, saw me as somebody carrying on their line and what their craft and what they were doing. And so that was one of those formative moments when I got out. I was like, yeah, okay, I don't really have to be an asshole. There's no reason for this. And I had to make that conscious decision to like try not to be an asshole and try not to be angry all the time. And
Yeah, that can still be very relevant today. Like, it's up to you to make your military experience your entire personality or to grow from it, as well as, yeah, you have your issues and your difficulties, but it's on you to work on that because who wants to get out of the military and become a crusty, dusty bro vet keyword? Nobody does, but you need to find that outlet. So for a lot of people, it's the gym. I'm seeing a lot of veterans start to write, whether they publish a book or just they get into workshops or in a journal. And I especially love that for men because it can be a really open space for just no judgment, just bros helping bros and getting in tune with that emotional intelligence and like emotional side to you. And it doesn't have to be this negative thing.
yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things too, like it makes me think about like when I first got out and when I was first taking creative writing classes, and you reach out to some of your guys and obviously guys being both men and women, right? But you just reach out to your folks and they're like, oh, what are you doing? And oh, I'm doing this. And I'd be like, I'm taking a creative writing class, right? Like super, super ashamed about it. And waiting for the typical Marine Corps. And I didn't get that. I was actually really surprised. And it made me wonder how I really knew my Marines, that they were also all of these guys were out too, right? That I was catching up with. And even the ones that were on active duty that were just so supportive of me because it was I'm their brother and they're just
Yeah,
happy I'm finding these, but there was
exactly.
never any judgment. And then of course it's oh, you should write about me. It always happened.
Remember that one time?
Yeah. And so that's how I got started. And then once I realized that this was what I was going to do, then that's a military term. I'm all in. You can't be half. What's his face? Jimmy Darmody. I quote this line from the Atlantic Sea. Jimmy Darmody went, what is it? With Nucky Thompson, right? He says, Nuck, you can't be half a gangster. Either you're in or you're out. And
Oh, I
that's
love
really
that.
relevant to our life, especially since Jimmy Darmody's character, Boardwalk Empire, that's what it was called. Jimmy Darmody was a World War I vet who'd come home, was looking for his place in the world, and goes back to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and tries to make a living for himself. But that always stuck with me. That's what he told Nucky Thompson, Steve Buscemi's character. You can't be half a gangster. You can't be half of anything. Like when you're on active duty, you can't be half a gang. Like my son, when he joined the Marine Corps, one of the things I told him was like, you can't be half a gangster. It's like, I know that a lot of your friends are going to be like on social media and doing this thing. I'm like, in no shade, but like, you're an 11, so keep your head in the game. You cannot be thinking about your social media presence, and he doesn't have social media, but I was just trying to be a good dad. Focus on the job. Your job is to fucking kill people who the government has said our people need killing. That's your job. That's what you're gonna focus on. Everything else when you come home, and that's an actual trait that we have. And then when I was out, I was like, then I better learn to write. I'd better learn to be a good teacher. Those are the things that I then was like, all right, cool. This is where I'm at. So I mean, what do they say? Grow where you're planted. It's been really great. All of my colleagues have been super great. When I was a student, my professors were always really encouraging. now a lot of them are my peers, which is we make jokes about, but it's been wild. And it's one of those things too, I think a lot about time and how, going back to that anger, right? Like we can't see more than a day or two ahead of us. And even when we can see a day or two ahead of us, we're not really guaranteed. Like, we can plan a day or two ahead of us, but we
Right.
don't really know what's coming. I could walk out to my car after this podcast and get hit by a meteor. Some velociraptor that some secret scientist let out of it could come and tear my arm. You never know what's going to happen from minute to minute, but we think we do. You think about how when you are in this moment, and it's a lot about being mindful, right? Oh, I've got this moment, I may as well make the best use of it. But we think that because I don't know what's coming, I'm just going to hold on to my little shit pile of anger here. And at least this is comfortable. At least I know this. Whereas if I have to let it go, I don't know what's coming down. And what if it's worse? I'm not a psychologist, but that's all that negative self-talk and all that stuff that we hear about now that's actually pretty prevalent in the mental health movement that we're seeing at this point in time. I think that's what gets a lot of us. Like, we're just,
Oh, absolutely.
this is something that our drill instructors or our staff NCOs and TAPs, they tell us like, oh, you're so wonderful because you did this job. And all right, I volunteered. I got paid. I have a college degree and I am a tenure track professor because of what the military did for me. So it's not like I got a bunch of freebies. I made different choices than other people. I don't know. I think we have to get out of our own way a lot. And it was really hard for me to get out of my own way. Being a dude, being a Hispanic dude, being older, I had to get out of my own way many times and a lot. And now
Yeah.
I'm in a position where I can, it's what's great about my position now is I can see young guys and young women getting out and be like, dude, take an art class. Oh, I'm going to go into business. Yeah, you're going to go into business because that's what you think you're supposed to do. If you really want to be in, hey man, if you really love spreadsheets and TPS reports and whatever, good on you. But just take a creative writing class, take a pottery class, take an art appreciation class or a music appreciation. Be more than just that objective that you
Yeah.
think you have to be. And
Yeah.
I think that helps us be whole, not healed in the way that America and the West is obsessed with healing and being whole, but at least it gives you something to look forward to. It gives you an outlet. You're not just this one thing, right? You are the actual multidimensional being you're supposed to be.
Yes. And especially in this like very big social media digital age, like just something for you, not to impress other people, not to exploit for money, not to make profit off of, just something that is good for you.
Yeah.
And I get it. You're coming out of the military, you're worried about where your next paycheck is coming from, you're wanting that stability. But I've had plenty of mentors tell me, like, hey, there's nothing wrong with just getting a decent job or working your way up. Because let's be honest, a lot of people don't care that you're a veteran and they shouldn't. They don't have to. You volunteered, no one forced you to. And that comes with a level of humility that is very difficult, especially Marines, to grasp. And so you mentioned a really good thing. You need to get out of your own way. Your ego is in your way of getting a humble job, working your way up, learning from your peers. Because just like you walked into your unit and your platoon, you didn't know everything. It takes time to transition. I know you said that word, but it takes time to really adapt into, and this doesn't have to be forever or permanent, but you always have to establish some good mindfulness, like, hey, what can I learn from this job? What can I take away from this job? Again, this isn't forever, but this could be good for my resume. This could be a good learning experience, as well as, like you mentioned, just do something for you in the creative space. And you don't have to just blast about it on social media. You don't have to brag about it, but just do something for you. Because whether you want to do talk therapy or medication, or you get outdoors or you go to the gym, it's giving you that space and that time to work through whatever is going on with you. And like you mentioned, you need to get out of your own way in multiple aspects. So whether that's your ego, your attitude, your anger, you're not feeling very fulfilled, a lot of those emotions can be projected onto people and spaces that don't and it's inappropriate. So when you have pen to paper, you have, and I'm the same way. That's why so many folks do encourage college, or at least go to a community college, just something that kind of opens your mind, changes your perspective, and allows for those neurons to go off and be like, hey, this is new for me. This is uncomfortable. I don't have to be perfect at it, because we're so used to that. but maybe this can come of good use. I also took a couple art classes in college, and it was so strange, but I was like, you know what? Why not? And it was a prerequisite, but I made the most of it. I wasn't like, oh, I'm too cool for this, or oh, I'm too good for this. No, it's more of, hey, I need to get this done. I might as well enjoy it. And you also mentioned like tomorrow isn't promised, tomorrow isn't planned. And so those little moments are something that can teach you gratitude and appreciation for the little things and slowing down, especially when military folks are so used to go,
Yeah.
and you don't like that uncomfortable feeling that comes with slowing down. So I'm really glad that you brought all of those things up. From starting all of that and really finding a passion in it, you said that you did some articles and some pieces, but did you always envision that you were going to write a book?
Yeah, once I knew I wanted to go, so what ended up happening is, and for listeners or and watchers that aren't familiar with the creative writing space, like there's this god awful thing called workshop where it's usually off the Iowa model where you write something and then you hand it to your classmates and they just talk about it for however long the workshop leader says. I'm not a huge fan of the Iowa model, but that's what it was, right? And one of the things I found, and there are actual disconnects, right? I was 34 when I went back to college. My classmates were like 18 and 19, and I'm writing about getting out of the military. I'm writing about my friends, worrying about my friends getting killed or my friends who had been killed. How do I pick up and move on? And the feedback I was getting from them wasn't, they were doing their level best. Some of my classmates were, but they don't have that life experience. So I'm not angry at them. I get it. Like I wouldn't have been able to
Yeah, you
walk.
can't blame them. Again, you keep an open mind to see what constructive criticism they can offer or feedback.
And so once I committed to doing the writing programs and moving forward and getting my degrees, I ended up just realizing that I wanted more feedback. And so then when I got into the MFA program, you write a thesis, which then becomes ideally would become a book. And so I knew then that I wanted to write and that it would be a book. It's a really weird thing to think about. And now that I teach graduate students, and some people are like, don't call it a book, I can't handle it thinking about a book. But really, that's what it became. And I knew that I wanted to talk about what it was like to come home because everybody loves to talk about what going to war was like.
True. So you wanted to offer something different.
Yeah, and that's something that goes beyond therapy and healing and writing, right? That's the art thing. We're thinking about like when I talk to students who are just trying to write to get it out on the page, great, good for them. And then the ones that want to take it to the next level, I'm like, okay, now what are you bringing new to the conversation? So for me, it's John Daly. He's got a book coming out. He's one of my classmates. It's Tough Rugged Bastards. Matt Caltrider just wrote his book, Double Knot, right? Those are still Casey Tellison's book, Freaks of the Feather, amazing memoir. But it's about time in Iraq. And I have Marine friends that we can sit around. And in fact, when we went to California for Memorial Day weekend, my friend Jay was like, Bennington was like, I want you to sign autograph copy of my book and stop at First Iron Hill. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. So then it became like a thing where 10 of us went up there. And all weekend long, and even my wife, who was an East Coaster at 2 Mardiv, not 1 Mardiv, we were all just sitting there swapping sea stories. Quite frankly, my part in the war wasn't that interesting compared to guys like John, who's one of the very early special operators, or Mac or Casey, machine gun. My story is just not that interesting. It's useful, but it's a behind the scenes. I was an RP. I was a caregiver. That was my job. There's not a whole lot of sexy shoot 'em up bang that people love to read about anyway.
But I think people forget and they don't put it in the same context as they do with World War One and World War
Yeah.
Two. It's you see the movies, read the books, and it's a little bit of everybody. It wasn't just one badass over there, one MOS.
Yeah.
It takes a whole force. And so
Exactly.
yes, you say that, but don't diminish your part in
Oh
history.
yeah. No, I'm proud of what I've done, and I'm still in contact with a lot of my Marines
That's awesome.
15, 20 years on.
Yeah.
Like these are dudes that I've got really deep, fruitful relationships with. Here's 4 books that I can give you my friends wrote that are really great. Go read those books if that's what you want. But for me, and some of it too came about because I wanted to tell partly their stories by telling my story, but also, and some of it, this goes back to me, some of the part of me being an asshole that I wasn't able to, like, things that really happened. Like I'm a nonfiction writer, so my book is all essays. They're true. I remember a friend of mine, a classmate of mine, she introduced me to her dad. Her and I were really good friends and colleagues. I helped her out in the classroom, and she was like, "Dad, I want you to introduce you to Michael. She walks away. The first thing out of his mouth was like, when the war in Iraq was really wrong. I'm like, dude, I don't fucking care. Like, why are you telling me this? Like,
Yeah. You get a lot of unsolicited opinions as a service member and a veteran, and you're just, okay.
and nobody ever
I got
talks about that. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Maybe if we make people aware of that, they'll stop doing that shit. They won't, but at least I will feel better having said, hey, please try to stop doing this. I don't need you to tell me what it, and actually there's a couple of essays where I talk about that, where it's, I get tired of people telling me what the war was like. I can actually, if you don't mind, I can, if you'll indulge me. This is the book, by the way.
ooh, okay, very nice.
Let's see.
But yeah, I definitely relate. I had a classmate, he was like, I was like, what, 23, 24. He was like 18, and he just kept trying to like poke and prod me about, like, what do you think about Hillary Clinton and Benghazi? And I'm just like, I don't fucking care. Also, I just don't like her, period. But what are you trying to get out of me, bro?
People like,
And
and
they were
so
just so surprised at that answer. He was like, "Oh, I didn't know." I was like, "Yeah, that's right. Please don't assume. Also, don't assume my political party because I'm Hispanic and because I served in the military. Like, you're wrong either way."
yeah. Yeah. And I had the same thing too. People like, oh, I bet you're super far. Like, no, not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not super far left either. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Like, I,
So that's why it's so good that we're having a lot of creative veterans just put their stories out and share their experiences in order to just clear that fog of assumptions and insinuations, because they can just be a little ignorant and frustrating and annoying. So you did that. Yeah. Show us the book again for the people watching. Look at that. Wow. The after.
I designed the cover. If you
You,
don't mind, I'll read this paragraph. It kind of, instead of
yeah, of
saying this is
course. I'd
what
love
it's
that.
about. So this is from an essay called What It's Like to Come Home. And I wrote this essay because I read Karl Marlantes' What It's Like to Go to War, and things that I had been thinking he put on paper
Mm.
years before I had been thinking them. And I never read his book before, but I was thinking about it. And this is, so anyway, Billy Pilgrim became unstuck in time. Norman Bowker drove around a lake in circles. Nick Adams went fishing. They did these things not because they went to war, but because they came home. They came home and everyone said they wanted to know what the war was like, only everyone didn't. People wanted to be told the war was wrong or heroic. People wanted to tell Billy and Nick and Norman how wrong or heroic the war was. People wanted the kill stories, the trauma stories, what they'd read about or seen on TV or in movies. They wanted to know how scared Billy and Nick and Norman were because the people who asked would be scared and they wanted reassurances. Reassurances that the askers were not cowards. Reassurances that the askers were right not to enlist or fight. Reassurances that the askers were just as good as them. Reassurances that the askers had nothing to prove, though they clearly had something to prove. Billy and Nick and Norman probably thought about home on the way home and how great it would be, because how could it not be? It wasn't there after all. And then they got home and realized that home wasn't what they remembered. And Billy
That's really
Pilgrim,
good.
thank you. Billy Pilgrim from, gosh, vet brain, right? Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut. Norman Bowker from Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. Nick Adams from Hemingway's. Hemingway wrote a whole bunch of stories on Nick Adams, and this one was out of A Big Hearted River Parts 1 and 2, out of his first book, which escapes me at the moment. It'll come back to me in a minute. But right, so I use those three literary characters, and all three of those stories, their writers talk about how they got home and it wasn't what it was expecting. And people legitimately were like, this is what you must feel so bad. And I talk about this a couple, like, you must feel like, when I first got out, people like, you must feel so bad for what you did. One, I don't know what that means. So a lot of it is, it's a reckoning. And I don't pull any punches. I tell people like, hey, chill out. Like, why do you foist your insecurities on me? Why are you foisting your fantasies on me?
Oh yeah, 100%. Especially you can give some grace when it's like your family and friends, but when it's like strangers on the internet or strangers that you just met, that made, I think, the transition more difficult for me, especially as a woman, but also for you too. Like, your MOS was RP. That wasn't what you were there to do. And even if that was your MOS, some people don't see combat and just the insinuation. And so that's why I love having these conversations in order for regular folks to just understand you and I, and like how to ask better questions.
Yeah.
Yes, I get it. You're curious. There's just certain things that you just don't ask
Yeah.
because it's really rude. and it's not your business. And also, you don't know what weighs on people. If anything, most people are slowly, and I feel like we've evolved to a time where it's, oh, thank you for your service. I appreciate your sacrifice. Like the dialogue is changing
Yeah.
because of the discussions that we're having. So thank you for sharing that. That was very beautiful. And I think it really does speak of the reality of I'm back where I'm supposed to be. I'm home or I'm stateside, but I feel different. And it isn't the same, and it wasn't this fantasy that I thought it would be. And it's almost the beauty of growth and change, and also a little bit of mourning who you used to be before. I know some people share that after they get home from deployment, they're like, oh, the green grass, AC, ice cubes, like little
Yeah.
things like that. So again, I'm glad that you're putting this stuff out there to let it out of your heart and share it with people that are like-minded, but also to help folks understand us a little better, to see our perspective without those rude questions.
Yeah. It's funny, but like my publisher was like, so who are you writing this for? That's what any publisher will ever ask anytime you're writing a book. Like, who's your intended audience? And one of the funny things is, I'm like, honestly, my intended audience is people who wore the uniform. And they're like, we think you're writing it to people who didn't wear the uniform. I'm like, did you wear a uniform? And they're like, no. I'm like, funny that you think that it's about you. I love my editor and I love my publisher. My editor, Kate, she is amazing. And I did not say that to her, other publishers. But it's one of those things where people are like, why did you write it? Why did you write it? The voice that you did, the way you did, use the language you did. I'm like, well, I'm an artist. That's part of what I do as an artist is tell stories not the same way that have been told for millennia and finding a new way in. But also it was just, it's about, I'm like, I wrote it for them. I was like, because these guys are never going to may not be able to tell their wives or their moms or their girlfriends what it was like. I was like, and I have the ability to put a couple of words together in a sentence. So if I do it, then they can be like, yeah, here, read this book. This will help you. It's like, and the civilians that want to read it, I want them to read it, but I didn't write it for them. And I tell them at the very beginning, this a compromise that my publisher and I had thought about was like the first section is called com check, and it's me in the now saying like, all right, so you're going to read some things that could be dark, that you might think are attacking you. I'm not angry with you. Like, you need to understand this is where we're at. When you go on the rides at Disneyland, right, and you have that little preamble, this is what it's going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of a thing where I'm like, don't. And one of the things I say, if you're offended by some of the things I'm saying, like, maybe check yourself. Maybe you're doing some of these things.
Oh yeah, I like that. That's a really good preface, and I feel like often there's a little bit of a disconnect lately. Like it's always everybody else's fault, or it's you're the problem. When you point fingers, you got three pointing back at you. And yes, self reflection is huge, and self accountability is huge. But for some people, it's easier to be delusional. It's easier to blame other people than it is to even reflect
Yeah.
on how they're showing up. So you can only do so much.
Yeah.
So again, if you feel attacked, that's on you, bro. I'm just doing me. I had an episode kind of like that. If the shoe fits.
And that's one of those things that like, and that is a cultural difference. When I talk a little bit about the cultural differences, is like that is one thing that's different on the outside, and I still haven't been able to wrap my head around it. And that's not it's not, it sounds like a generalization, but it's not. But there are some people who just, and there are those people in our own military community too who refuse to take responsibility. But generally, by and large, we are pretty good at taking responsibility for our own actions. Yeah, I fucked this up. This is on me. My bad, dude. And then going out into the civilian workforce and people like being terrified to say, yeah, this is on me.
I don't get it either. I'm definitely picking up on what you're saying. I see it all the time. And I'm just like, trust me, I get it. It's so hard to admit to yourself, as well as others, your coworkers, your family, whomever, to admit that. But once you do, it's so liberating because then accountability like solidifies the next step of what are your choices afterwards here.
Yeah.
You can do better or you can do the same and get the same results. And so I think we were just put into an environment where, even if we're here, like CONUS, we're not deployed, we're not OCONUS or what have you, or TDY or on a vessel or a ship, a boat. It is make or break. A lot of these decisions require thought process and execution. And then there's the after action report of what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we improve? And I'm not really sure where that disconnect is on society and why we're not doing that. I personally see it a lot in the lack of parenting. A lot of parents just want to be friends. They don't want to parent their children. And that becomes an issue wherever those children grow up to be adults and then in wherever communities they end up, whatever professions. And maybe it's also like in school, like groupthink, like we're stronger together if we're all just silent and nobody admits it, but we don't get anywhere
Yeah.
with that. And it's not just, this isn't just the problem or whatever, this could be larger scale. That's why society, we're at the way that we are, because no one wants to take initiative. No one wants to admit that they had shortcomings. And so we're not growing, we're not progressing. And that's the whole point of society and being parents and having kids and stuff and making mistakes, is to do better.
Yeah.
But I get it. A lot of us are stuck. I've been stuck, like how you said, of getting out of the military. And it's easy to be angry. It's easy to blame everybody. You just put your blinders up. And I think for my personal journey, the best radical accountability and responsibility like opens you up to so many opportunities of growth. So you want that. You see these cool people doing cool things and you're like, they didn't get anywhere by blaming everybody, by playing victim, by not doing different. Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know what all it is. That could be a really good like sociology thesis.
I think it's true. And I see it in the classrooms. I'm a college professor. And so I
Oh,
see,
true.
especially after the pandemic, like the way students behaved in class before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now post,
Mm.
like it's really interesting. I remember seeing this when I got out. So I got out on Monday. I was a first class petty officer. I'd been raised by Marines, so I thought more like a staff NCO than like a Marine staff sergeant or something. And on Thursday, the age group that I was responsible for leading were now my peers, and watching them like not be able to show up to classes on time, and going in like the first week of school is like finding housing and all these other things. It was wild. And I don't want to, a lot of it, I was being overstimulated, but watching 18-year-olds. And so in my mind, grown ass men and women, mom, dad, where should I live? Mom, dad, can I do this? And I'm like, boy, you are 18 years old. Get up. What are you doing? Little Johnny and Tyler and Hunter asking mommy like permission to go buy, I don't know, a Reese's cup or something at the bookstore. You don't know how to make your own decision?
Yeah, I think that's also because it's easier to blame your parents or somebody else, because you can't even wipe your ass without asking
And
somebody
it
else.
was just, that was probably the biggest culture shock, is like leading guys and men and women in that 18 to 22-year-old age bracket who were like making decisions, like getting supplies, like going to the range, able to put rounds down range, being in units like Marines, like leading fire teams and being responsible for millions of dollars worth of equipment. And then I get out on a Monday. On Thursday of the same week, I start school. And that was just like wild for me. I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
what
Culture
has
shock, it's a good word for it, yeah. And I think maybe because I think I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes when you're just so anxious and insecure and unsure of who you are and yourself, it's just like you overthink everything and you just freeze.
yeah.
And so it's easier to go to your mom, dad, friends, but sometimes that's where a lot of personal development and growth comes from, is just making those small little decisions until you feel confident and sure of yourself, until you figure out like who you are and what your groove is. Nobody can do it for you.
That's one of the joys that's about being teaching college classes and being a writer, is like being able to be in those classrooms. And like when students come into my classroom, they know they're going to work, but they also know that they're going to hear me say yes a lot. And one of the things I talk about in one of my essays, where I'm talking about this idea of transition, and like I'm supposed to assimilate back into the civilian culture. And I reject that. I don't want to come back to civilian culture. I'm not a civilian. I'm a veteran. The United States government spent a lot of money on me and you, making us very resilient, making us adaptable, making us
I like that. That's really true. Yeah.
better. They made us better citizens by the
Mm,
things that they gave us, the
yeah.
skills that they gave us. Yeah, all the bullshit, all the things that we trauma bond over and laugh about. Okay, sure, fine. That's a truth too. But one of the things we overlook is those soft skills that really make us or break us. And in
Mhm.
our case, make us. And one of the things I talk about is how I do this question and answer. I'm like, so let me get this straight. I'm a veteran and you want me to assimilate back into civilian culture. I was like, but my students, I have a class of 12 students, and they introduce me, dear professor. Some of it's because I put the fear of God into them. Don't email me, bro. I was like,
Yeah.
don't do that. But like, I'm talking like 7 or 8 weeks into a class. So halfway through a semester, and students are like, Professor so-and-so, I am in your class. And I'm like, bro, I look at you like twice a week for an hour. Like, I know who you are. Like, there's this idea that these kids feel anonymous and unheard. And I'm like, and you want me to be a part? This is how your students behave in my classroom, and you want me to come back to that? Nah, man, I'm good. Like, I'll be abrasive. I'll be direct. I'll be who the Navy and the Marine Corps taught me to be, because it's making me useful. My colleagues can count on me in the drop of a hat. Hey, we need to get this done. I got it. I'll take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I really like that.
and so this idea of that's where I get irritated when people like transition back to the civilian role. I'm not a civilian. I never can be. I never will be. And I don't mean that in a way like, oh, I'm just better than that, but it's just I'm better trained. Why would you not want me to utilize the things that your tax dollars taught me to
Yeah.
better my
Yeah.
community?
Yeah, now I am really seeing what you mean, and I hope the listeners are applying that sentiment how they see fit. But yeah, and I feel like that's probably one of my biggest struggles, and even still to this day, it's not like I'm striving for perfection, but there's not necessarily anyone that I'm proud of to go back to. I was an 18-year-old. I thought I knew everything. I was willing to try something new because that's like when I joined at 17, but and so when people say, "Oh, you're stuck or you're this or you're more than just a veteran," I was like, "Yes, you're right, but also I can use this to elevate me." And so that's what I want other veterans to see, and that's why I genuinely enjoy empowering them, is because we are so much more. We were given so many tools, and it's up to you to
Exactly.
use them or not. But also, it's not in the sense of you're better than civilians or you're better than other people, but you were taught better.
Yeah.
We're taught in an environment that is like no other. That's up to you to either play the victim or to use that to elevate yourself. That's why veterans are so useful in the workforce, because you have this experience that is somewhat unique. There's more of us getting out, sure, but that's why it's so fulfilling to watch them blossom. It's great that we're having these talks, that resources are finally being available and created and not being gate kept, and that we're building this environment where we can open up the space of, if that's what helps you, bro, like, I love that for you. I'm going to cheer you on. Because how many veterans have succumbed to their struggles, drugs, alcohol, abuse, unstable relationships? We don't want that. So, again, I'm glad that when you mentioned it to your friends that you were going to start writing, they were like, hey, yeah, good for you. Whereas maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they would have called you some slurs, they
Yep.
would have called you lame. And that's why people get stuck in that mentality. I tried this, but now my peers are making fun of me. You're so used to caring about what people think, but you're like, no, this is good for me. This is what works. And so when you stray from the pack, in some instances, it can be good. And I'm glad
Yeah.
that you did, because look at you now.
Yeah. I still got a lot of work to do. My wife and I, we were laughing. I was like, we've come pretty far. Like, when we first got out, I had $8 to my name trying to pay child support, my ex-wife's car payment, feed my new wife and her daughter, my daughter. And the other day we were sitting at like a nice restaurant having a couple of cocktails because we could. And she's like,
Yeah.
we've come really far. And the other thing too,
Yeah.
I think about being embracing who we are as veterans and embracing the skills that the military gave us is it doesn't just make us better, it makes everybody around us better.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
and yeah, that's why I will never understand still to this day the cutthroat competition or belittling other veterans, and then it's the same people that are like, "I got your 6, bro," or "Yeah, veterans support veterans," or "female empowerment," and it's all BS, because I see what you're doing to the people around you and in the community. Like, it's not just in the veteran sphere. Like, society overall benefits when people stand up and do better for themselves and for their community. And I think that's what I've always just tried to reiterate, is like, with Resilient Rowdy, it's, yes, you've been through some struggles, you've been through some really messed up stuff, but you can overcome and you can show other people the way.
There's this weird thing that I always hear it a lot, and especially in my field, where I'm not the person. It's not my job to teach you all of these things. Like, on the one hand, yeah, I get it. I don't, but I'm the opposite, right? I wrote this book so people could be like, oh, here's actually somebody who went through this. It is in a way my responsibility, because if I've had people wrong me, I'm not saying that I've been wrong, but just and then I overcome that, and then I
Mhm.
watch somebody else get wronged. One, I definitely feel honor bound to go correct that wrong. And
Right.
two, then show that other human how to move past that. I
Yes,
don't
absolutely.
I don't understand the disconnect in a lot of places. Like, that's not my job.
Yeah,
Whose
not my
fucking job
job,
is
not my
this?
problem, and again, no one like, nothing gets better with that mentality.
No,
And
and
yeah,
it's like,
sure, you can lead a horse to water, you can't force them to drink, and at least you tried. You sleep a
yeah,
little better at night knowing that you tried.
you're a Latina, I'm a Latino male, and it's in my school now, it's not like this. But when I first moved to North Carolina, like I was the, and I'm not, I don't speak Spanish very well. My grandmother didn't teach me. My
Okay.
next book is about all of family and how long we've been.
Ah,
But a lot of people would be like, it's really hard being the only Latino or Latina person in this space, and I just don't have the energy to do it. So who's going to tell people what it's like to be brown?
yeah.
I'm not going to. That's not my job. I'm like, okay, so and in this book that I'm working on,
Deconstruct that mentality,
yeah, it's like,
deconstruct those thoughts.
and it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's like people would like, when I first moved out here, yeah, were some people racist? Yeah, some people were being racist when like, where you from California before that. And like playing that game, like trying to track down when I came to this country. And then they find out my family's been here for several hundred years. I would say like 99% of those people were not being actively racist. They weren't even being like passively racist.
Maybe
They
just a little
ignorant, like, and ignorant, even, and ignorant's a hard word because then it makes puts people on the defensive. Oh, you just don't think, but it's more like isolated. There, nobody talks about this, but like when the early explorers walked into the Amazon rainforest, how did the natives look at those people? How did the Aztec or the Maya look at Cortez when they got off the boat? Phew,
yeah.
all white and pasty and scurvy.
It's almost like people of color forget that people of color can also be racist to others.
And we're so like, if we're isolated, like
Yeah.
we live in our own little bubble. So if I went to a small town in Alabama years ago, I was legitimately the only Hispanic male there, probably within many miles. And people had lots of questions. I don't feel like they had those questions to put me in my place.
Just
They
wanna
were just,
learn.
where I live now, years ago, you couldn't get a taco to save your life. Now I can go, there's like 6 taco shops I can frequent now. Like
Yeah.
there are Hispanic kids working at Target, checking me out at Target, like at the coffee shop. And now like I go to this one place, it's called Los Portales. And I hate being reductive, but white people at this taco shop all the time because they didn't have access to it. Now they have access to it.
Mhm.
So they're taking advantage of it. Like it's not this big giant thing. And I think that, but with the veteran population, we still get, I don't know, there's this weird, like people will go into an Ethiopian restaurant, never trying Ethiopian food and be like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll try it. But then, hey, here's a different idea about the veteran culture. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah, people forget that we can be, like, really a little closed-minded or, like, really, hesitant to change.
Mhm.
And I get it. There's things put in place because it's worked before, but with anything, you need to be able to adapt and overcome. We hear that all the time. So adapt and overcome. It's not just a phrase for a t-shirt or what have you, or just something that your platoon sergeant just says just for shiggles.
Yeah.
It's put in place for a reason.
Like I really, like people will tell me, oh, you've done so much work, you've changed some. I really haven't done anything other than what I learned in the military.
Mhm.
Like I remember I went on a job interview one time, and this woman gave me the interview pretty much because she just wanted to talk to a veteran. It was very plain. She was not going to give me this job. And I lost my temper with this woman. Like all the questions in the job interview related to my experiences in Iraq and in uniform. And I was like, yeah, this doesn't have anything to do with the job I'm interviewing for. And at the end of it, she finally was like, I'm just worried about your lack of civilian work experience. I think disqualifies you from this job. And I was like, I think you're full of shit, ma'am. I think you just wanted to get your rocks off by talking to a war veteran. And now you have. I was like, you've asked me a bunch of questions and you keep saying, forgive my ignorance about the military, this and forgive me. I was like, it's not like I went around killing babies and causing international incidents. I was like, the United States government trusted me with pointy bullets to put in other people when I needed to. And tons of firearms and tons of equipment. I was like, and the overwhelming majority of us did not cause an international incident. We're not war criminals in the way we think of the Nazis as war criminals. Like
Right.
things happen, like it's not like that in your. And she was just like, she was mad that I called her out for her
Yeah.
own behaviors. I was like, wait a minute. Like I was like, the military is about leadership. It's convincing people to do things they wouldn't want to do. I was like, are we getting shot at in this office? No. Does payroll need to be made? Yeah. Do people want to work payroll? No, they would rather go out and day drink with their homies. I get it. I would too. My job is to convince them to do this first, and then we go day drink. Just this idea
Yeah.
that like I couldn't be anything
But
because I
that.
was a war veteran. It's
Yeah, I'm surprised that she, like, didn't see how y'all both show up to a meeting and you have this experience, but how can that experience equal or help us in this environment? That's disappointing. I'm also not surprised, but
right.
I'm
And it's
sorry.
funny, but like I tell that story, but I'm not telling like the 900 other stories about my colleagues or my students being kind and generous and funny. And it's just for me, like I do that in the book because I'm telling a story, right? And I think that's just how we are as humans. Like we love to focus on the things that don't work well.
Okay. Instead of being optimistic and taking a chance, and
Yeah.
how else are you supposed to get civilian experience if no one's willing to hire you or
And I document that. It was really, like I said, it was really tough for me when I got out. There was a lot of lean years. It was a lot of growing, a lot of anger and being upset. And eventually I got to this point where I was like, and this is separate from the writing, but I just got to this point where I was like, I talk a lot about my dead friends. I think they'd all kick my ass right now if they saw me being like this.
oh my gosh, yes. I'm so glad that you said that because I mean, I saw it somewhere, or maybe just somebody said it, but they were like, "My dead friends keep me honest." Because like at night, I'm not religious anymore. I'm a little spiritual, but even then, I think, okay, maybe they're either in the ground or maybe they're somewhere. Their energy, and I've had more friends suicide than I have
Yeah.
in war. I was at the tail end of GWAT, but I have some friends now that I'm older than them now than they ever were here on earth. And I thought the same thing. I'm in my late 20s and I'm still trying to figure out my life. And I see the state and the quality of life that I'm living. And I'm like, they would be so disappointed. Or they know that they believed in me. Like we talked about all of our dreams and what we wanted to do. And here I am just wasting time, just twiddling my thumbs and feeling sorry for myself. And I'm really glad that I have them on my shoulder to encourage me and to keep going for them because
Yeah.
they're not here anymore. They never made it to 30. And here I am working my butt off and just trying to make them proud as well as myself. And at night, I can genuinely say that I don't I've never had to sell myself short. I don't violate my morals or my integrity to get to where I want to be or to do the things that I want to do, and I live an honest life because nothing scares me more than one of them slapping me in the face in my dream or when I get up to heaven and join them and they're like girl, I saw you. I was watching
Yeah.
the whole time. And so they hold me accountable. Yeah, I might not believe in God, but I have them and they keep me honest and they keep me grounded and motivated. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I think that's a good reason to keep living.
I thought a lot about this and I lost sight of it when I got out, but it was like, man, I'm not dead. And actually, you'll appreciate this, but in the book, there's an essay called 45.
Okay.
And I wrote it on my 45th birthday or right before my 45th birthday when I realized that that I was now older than my sergeant major Ellis who'd been killed in Iraq.
Yeah. That
And
really
how my
puts things
son
into
was turning
perspective.
18 and getting ready to graduate from Marine Corps boot camp. And because he also joined at 17 and like thinking about all those milestones
Yeah.
that I still got to have and he didn't. And so I
Yeah.
wrote this essay. And it's one of those things that I think about a lot. It's yes, I'm going to complain about the heat. It's my God given right, but at least I'm hot and I'm not dead. Oh, like last year, you probably saw on Instagram because I don't have manners when it comes to that, posting all my pictures about London, right? Like, I don't give a fuck. I went there. And I remember I was telling my wife, I was like, hey, I want to go to London. She's like, great. In a year, we'll save money. I'm like, no, my birthday's next week. I bought the tickets. We leave in 6 days. And she was like, what? I'm like, we both have good jobs. It'll make it. I was like, look. And one of her friend Holly, her anniversary was just a couple weeks ago.
She
And
also had a friend that passed.
oh yeah,
Yep.
so my wife was in Ramadi for a year, and when all of those, it wasn't just women, but that a VBID killed a 7 ton full of people, and it was like a lot of women in that VBID. It was in 2005 or six, I can't remember. I want to say it was June 19th is that anniversary date, but we were
Mhm.
talking about milestones. They're dead and can't see this anymore, and maybe they wouldn't have even wanted to because they wanted to go back and be that small town little grumpy person. I was like, but I'm not going to allow them to make me do that. Like, I'm going to go to fucking London. I'm going to
Yeah.
go have fish and chips and drink tons of beer and cider. And I'm going to drink deeply from life. Like, cause I still have mine. And
Yeah.
people,
Enjoying life while you have it. While
like,
you
I make mistakes all the time, but I'm going to try to be a good dude to people.
Yeah.
Like, why would you, after coming home from a war and after being a servant, which that's why it's called the service, because we're servants. Why would you squander that? Why
I'll
would you,
never understand why, especially like really crappy people are the way that they are. I'm also a firm believer in karma, and that's on them.
yeah,
I'm really proud of you for being able to take everything and change and enjoy your life and make the most of it and do the things while you can, because time is something that you don't get back.
yeah,
And it's something that it takes, and I've said this a couple times before on some of my like personal and even in my interviews, it's you don't realize it until you hit a breaking point of you're like, oh my gosh, I just wasted months, years feeling this way and doing the same BS and expecting a different outcome or not. And so here you are just making something of yourself and evolving and bettering yourself instead of just making excuse. Anyone can make excuses. I don't want to hear it. And I get it, trust me. There's so many obstacles, and obstacles are different than excuses, but I'm proud of you for being able to just make something of yourself and enjoy the ride and enjoy that journey, because you don't know where it's going to take you. And that takes blind optimism to be there. You had mentioned briefly a second book. So I wanted to ask you, I hope that you feel proud of yourself about your first book. And I'm so excited to read it. But now you're thinking about working on a second book. So what's that about?
so it's second and third book, actually. Yeah. So one of them is the working title right now. Kate, my editor, if she's listening, then she can hear this,
Hey,
right?
Kate.
Is Things Left Unsaid. So collect essays and other pieces that didn't make it into this book that are similar to in vein in this subject matter.
Okay.
Also, like moving forward and like me and essays about what I've learned in the classroom and what the military taught me about how I run a classroom and
Mhm.
being a dad. Now I'm 48 years old. And so like my son's 24 and this book is new, but it's also a snapshot of up to stopped maybe 2-3 years ago because
Yeah.
then the editing and all that stuff. So let's move on now. And then the next book that I'm actually really excited about is right now it's called Pocho. And it starts off with, so you're Colombian, yeah?
Mhm.
So in Mexican Spanish, pocho means is, I don't know if it's the same word in Colombian Spanish, but it's somebody who doesn't speak the language, isn't quite Mexican enough because they're not really real,
Okay.
because we've lost that part of our culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah, we have different words for that, but yeah, I know what you mean now, yeah.
so like this book is talking about what's it mean to be a Chicano or Mexican American or Colombian American
Mhm.
or who's the arbiter of those things, right? My
Yeah,
wife, she's white, and so it's an experimental book, but it talks a lot about race and family. There's a story that I tell in about like how I burst into tears when I was stationed at the Naval Academy because I didn't realize I missed tacos until I hadn't had them in a year. And then I saw a taco truck and I ran, like my wife and I, we were out running. I talk about how I smelled the taco truck
mhm.
and I just made a beeline for it. And my wife, Lisa, was like, "Where are we going?" I'm like, I smell a taco truck. Don't you smell that taco? Because I have no idea what that smell is. And I
Yeah,
knew what it was. It was carne asada. And then going and running back to my apartment and getting $40 of cash or whatever and just like having that. And now, and the other part of it too is I'm involved in a group on campus called Centro Hispano, and they have a program called, I think I told you about this in
mhm.
private, like about Mi Casa, where I go and I teach creative writing to the Hispanic kids in our area. Like they have to apply to be in this program, and it's a college
Yeah,
prep program for them.
that's awesome.
And when I was in high school, nobody ever would have thought I'd be like doing that. And it's funny, but I tell my colleague, and these are all high school kids and some of the mentors in Centro that are working in Mi Casa, I was like, but the fact of the matter is my last name is still Ramos. Like I still have brown skin.
Yeah,
I The fact that I am here says that you can be here too. Like when I
yeah,
was growing up, I didn't have very many people like us to look up
mhm.
to. And you know how it is. And when I was at UNC Wilmington and telling people, and there's always they are generally white who are like offended for me about things. And I'm like, you do realize that I've actually had more shit with other Chicanos and Mexican Americans than white. Like no white person is ever, and not that doesn't happen. Like for me, my experience has not been overt racism from white people, but it
Oh,
has
it's from
been.
everybody. Everybody can catch these hands, and everybody has the audacity, so I
But
definitely agree with that.
but like having everybody that looks like me with similar last names like me, why don't you talk like us? Why aren't you like us? How come do you think you're better? It's like,
Yeah,
and
culture and identity can be very difficult, especially when you're living in another country, and then it's this almost I don't know, it seems like a little bit of a competition, but I just
yeah,
never saw it that way, and I'm also, like, learning how to deconstruct a lot of those things for in my opinion, and being born in Colombia and being raised here, and I get the little remarks from my cousins or from family, and I'm like, "What do you expect? I was raised here."
yeah,
But that's also what led me to serve in the army. I felt very grateful. We were very blessed, and I wanted to give back. I tried so hard to keep it separate, and especially in high school, and now I'm like, "No, this is what makes me," and you're right. Like you said, like, your last name is Ramos, my last name is Jaimes, and I got really tired of people mispronouncing my name, and I'm trying to embrace that more, and it's a beautiful journey because now I don't criticize myself as much and I give myself more grace, and I'm embracing my culture because I can, because I am, and I'm a little of both, and that's okay.
yeah,
And everybody else's judgment can just shove it because I just don't want to hear it.
yeah,
Don't care. Don't know. And it's also not a competition. Who's more Mexicano? Who's more Mexicana? Like, I'm not here to compete with you. It's just me and myself, and that's all that matters.
yeah,
And no one gets lifted up by just this constant little bickering. And so you can apply that to whatever it may be, veterans, civilians, college kids, identity and culture, like even Mexican, Puerto Rican, Colombian, like we all like bash on each other when really we should all just be united because we're all human race.
yeah. And that's what I tell my casa kids when I'm teaching them about writing. I get to tell them what my classroom with them looks like is what my classrooms look like in high school. Like
Mm,
they're used to being the other. I was like, we're in a space where we're not the other. One of the things in this book that I'm talking about is like, that was growing up in Southern California and it was high school kid shit. But also like now, whenever people ask me where I'm from, it's to ask me de donde eres, like, and it's about establishing connection with me because there are so
yeah.
few people of Hispanic descent in in this part of North Carolina or in North Carolina in general that like the Ecuadorians and the Guatemalans and Venezuelans and Colombians and the Boricuas and the
Mhm.
Cubans. We're just happy to see somebody that looks similar and has,
Yeah.
you put on one Bad Bunny song or something, and all of us are going to start moving generally the same way, right?
Hell yeah.
And
Pulling
it's
that
like,
bunny.
it's one of those things where we can find those common grounds and it's always about establishing connection. And I think that
Yeah, you're right.
that that's what this book, and it's also about my family. Like on my dad's side, we're
Mhm.
related to a guy named Andres Avalino Duarte. You can Google him. There's a statue. There's a picture of me in front of the statue with my entire extended family. We
Cool.
can trace them back to Sinaloa, Mexico, or Sonora, Mexico, in the 1750s. His grandparents, they were all Spanish soldiers, and so I've been researching that. My grandmother, she on my mom's side, she was born and lived in a place called Chavez Ravine, which is where Dodger Stadium now is. And so she was a part of that. She lived there during the time when that land was stolen from those people.
Mhm.
So I'm researching that. And so this book's gonna take a while to, like, the stuff that's about me is easy to write. But like the stuff about my family and on both sides.
Yeah, because
And
you wanna do it due diligence and do it justice, so that's really cool. I'm definitely looking forward to both, honestly, like, all 3, but that's really awesome, and I'm glad that you're still continuing this journey. Some folks that I've talked to, it's like a one and done kinda thing. Totally respect that, but I'm really excited to see just where it goes and definitely wanting to support you in that journey, so I really appreciate you giving that insight of the next 2 books coming.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so for anyone, because this podcast is for anyone, veterans, civilians, cats, I don't know if cats listen. What would you recommend or suggest, or any little last tidbits of advice for someone that wants to get into the creative space and just express themselves? Is there anything that you want to share with them?
I will sum up what I think it was Kurt Vonnegut that says it, and he's got a really great quote because he's Vonnegut. Just do it,
Yeah.
is what I'm gonna say,
That's
right?
that
Like
easy. Don't overthink it. Yeah.
don't overthink it. Just, in fact, I was talking with a woman the other day. She had asked me to, I went and visited her classroom and I was like, I think you're overthinking this. Just write it. It's going to be awful at first. Not all of us are Pulitzer Prize winning writers in disguise. We just haven't found our superpower. That's not how life works, where we find our superpower one day. And it's like, you try to make a cup, it's going to look like garbage. You try to write
Yeah.
a
It's
story.
you got to work it to get it.
and you've got to, and there's magic in the doing of it, and just
Oh,
don't
absolutely.
don't be afraid and just do it. Like,
Yeah.
just and let go and challenge yourself to not be a perfectionist, right? Westerners are terrible about that.
Oh,
Oh, and us military folks, we're really bad about that. If you're not going to do it, you better, if you're going to do it, you may as well don't ever half-ass it. In fact, I just said that like 40 minutes ago. But when it comes to your creative work, like, when, for me as a profession, like writing is my profession, I cannot half-ass it. But if you're just getting into it and you want to try it, just do it. No one's going to say no. If they do, you don't need that kind of negativity in your
yeah.
life.
And it gets better each time, that the more
Yeah.
that you do it, the more that you practice, the more that you hone in on that, pick up a thesaurus. Google is right there. For people that are very connected and glued to these, you'd be surprised the lack of the ability to Google things.
Yeah.
But just thank you so much for coming on today and just letting us get to know you a little bit, giving us some insight about the journey from military to out of the military, and like your writing journey. And yeah, it's been a long time coming because I was waiting. I was like, maybe he'll come on. And
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like,
I've wanted to be on here a while, and then I was like, I don't really have anything to say, but now I have a book, so now it's worth it.
nah, you could have come on even without the book. Even just your insight, like I said, like it's refreshing and it needed to be shared.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
know that a lot of folks, because again, and I'm trying to actually have two friends of mine on the podcast. I do see a lot of Marines really struggle compared to the other branches on that journey. So really, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for just letting us in your brain and sharing this creative process so that others can find some healing and some fun with it and just something to get them off their phone.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Michael, where can we find you and where can we find your book?
I am RP Beals Writes on Instagram. And you can, and I think, let me see, look what my website is. I don't even, I talk about being a professional. I don't even know what my own website is. It's Michael Ramos Writer. So just my name, writer.com. You can pick up my book from Amazon. You can pick it up from UNC Press. Both links are on my website and on my Instagram page. And if any of your listeners are interested, just drop me a line. Like, you had that one friend a couple of years ago, was like, hey, my friend's interested in writing. Like, yeah, man, send him my way. I'm always happy to talk about writing and what it's like being out. And
Awesome. Well,
hopefully, I'm trying to, now that I have a new job where I'm not in a desk at a desk like 4 or 5 days a week. I'm trying to get out and do more readings and public readings, and like out and about in places like where there's,
yeah, that's awesome.
so going down to Georgia and like at a cool indie bookstore, if there's one there, going and do a public reading, sign books, chat with people, that kind of stuff.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Please get connected with him if you're, curious, thinking about it. Don't overthink it, but just do it,
Yeah.
like you said. And be sure to check out his book. I will also be getting that book here soon, and I would be happy to do a book review. Thank you again, Michael. And I don't know, maybe you'll come back.
Yeah, I'd
Maybe.
love to be back at some point. Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome.